You've heard it a million times, right? Maybe you've even thought it yourself. The number one knock against people of faith is that they're hypocrites, that there's this giant gap between what they say they believe and how they actually live. But here's the thought. What does their own source material have to say about it? Let's actually dive into the Bible and see what it says about the performance of faith.
So let's just ask the big question right up front. What happens when faith stops being about something real on the inside and turns into just a show you put on for everyone else? As it turns out, the biblical texts see this as a massive deal, maybe one of the most critical problems you can have. To really wrap our heads around this, we have to go back to the original language. The entire concept of hypocrisy in the Bible hangs on this one really powerful metaphor, the idea of an actor on a stage. Okay, check this out. The original Greek word that gets translated as hypocrite is hypokrites. And you know what it means? It literally just means an actor, somebody who puts on a mask and plays a role. So right from the jump, the word isn't really about someone who tries and fails. It's about someone who is knowingly putting on a costume and pretending to be something they absolutely are not. And Jesus himself uses this incredibly graphic image to hammer the point home. I mean, just think about that. He's looking at the most religious, most respected people of his day and says, "You guys look perfect on the outside, but inside, you're a tomb. The performance is flawless. But behind the mask, there's just decay and death." Oof. And this is a super important distinction we have to make. The texts aren't talking about a good person who messes up every now and then. I mean, that's everybody. This is aimed at something completely different. It's about the deliberate performance, the choice to act righteous while on the inside you're not even trying. And because it is a deliberate act, the biblical writers don't treat this as some minor character flaw. They treat this whole performance thing like a serious spiritual sickness, a disease of the heart. And this is where you see the core conflict. On the outside, you see all the right stuff, the loud prayers, giving money with a big show, following every little rule down to the letter. The performance is A+. But the texts say, hey, let's look backstage. And what do we find? Greed. A total neglect for what's right. And the real engine behind it all? A desperate need for applause from the crowd, not approval from God. This is a diagnosis from the prophet Isaiah, written hundreds of years before Jesus, and it was so on the money that Jesus quoted it himself. This is the heart of the issue, right here. Your mouth can say all the right words, but your heart, the real you, is a million miles away. It's just lip service. And this isn't a one-off complaint either. It is a consistent warning that's woven through the entire Bible. You see it way back in the Old Testament with King Saul, whose big public sacrifice was just a cover for his own rebellion. You see it constantly with the Pharisees in the Gospels. And you even see it pop up in the early church with this couple who pretended to be way more generous than they actually were. The message is always the same. Stop performing. Okay, so what? Why is this such a big deal? What's the actual harm when someone just puts on a spiritual mask? Well, the Bible is crystal clear that the consequences, they're severe. So the damage starts with a person wearing the mask, right? It hardens their own heart. But it doesn't stop there. It ripples out. It wrecks the credibility of their entire community. It dishonors the very God they claim to represent. And maybe worst of all, it pushes away people who are genuinely curious about faith, making them think the whole thing's a fraud. The Apostle Paul puts it so bluntly, quoting an older text. He's basically saying, hey, when you live a double life, the rest of the world doesn't just look at you and shake their heads. They blame God for it. The performance doesn't just ruin your reputation, it ruins God's. The stakes really couldn't be any higher. So, that's the problem, the diagnosis, the damage, and yeah, it sounds pretty bleak. But the story doesn't end there. The sources are just as clear about the cure for this disease, the path back to being real. And this is the big twist. The cure is not trying harder to perfect your performance. It is not about becoming a better actor. The texts say the real cure is the absolute opposite. You have to stop acting. You have to drop the mask, get humble, and just admit where you failed. So what does that actually look like day to day? Well, the texts give some pretty clear steps. First, constantly check your motives. Always be asking yourself, who am I really doing this for? Second, when you mess up, own it. Quickly. Don't let it fester. Third, do good things in secret. Do stuff that only God will ever see. That way you know you're not doing it for the applause.
And finally, stay close to the source of truth itself, because it's hard to hide in the dark when you're standing next to a giant spotlight.
And this promise right here is the engine that makes the whole thing work. The text says that when you're honest about your failures, you're not met with condemnation. You're met with forgiveness. And even more than that, you're cleansed. It's a process of being made clean from the inside out, which is the total opposite of that whitewashed tomb we were talking about.
So what this all boils down to is a fundamental shift in everything. Your goal changes from chasing human applause to simply honoring God. Your method changes from putting on an external mask to working on an internal transformation. And the results? I mean, it's a world apart. You go from a life of deception and judgment to one of freedom and forgiveness.
And this is the end game. This is where all that hard, honest, internal work leads. The ultimate prize isn't for the person with the most convincing performance. It's for the person who is pure in heart, the one who is genuine, authentic, and sincere all the way through. According to this text, that's the person who actually gets to see God.
So in the end, it all comes down to this one idea. The faith described in these texts does not demand perfection from people. In fact, it completely condemns the performance of perfection. What it values more than anything else is authenticity. It's about having an honest heart that knows it's flawed, but is willing to be real anyway.
And so we're left with this one last question to chew on. The sources seem to suggest that for the actor, for the person performing their faith, the moment that mask finally falls is a moment of terrifying judgment. But for the person who's just trying to be authentic, that very same moment, well, that's when their freedom truly begins.